There are two questions that one hears frequently when people are first exposed to the vocabulary of supermind or supramental. The first question is, what is this newfangled thing that Sri Aurobindo has invented? And what is its validity? Does it really exist? Is it only a creation to justify a lack? Was there ever such a thing even in the ancient traditions or existing traditions? It's a whole category of questions asking, where does this new phrase, this new term come from? The second category of questions is about, well, how does it matter to me? If supermind exists, what difference does it make to me? And if it is something so high and inaccessible, anyway, it's beyond my reach. How does it matter to the world? And if at all it matters to the world and to me, what can I do about it? They're all valid questions which we will address. But I'll put these questions in context of the theme of our retreat, New World based on a new consciousness. It's all right to say new, but there are many new things. There is the new, which was fashionable 30 years ago, and then a new which comes, which was fashionable 20 years ago, and then the new, the new story, the new American dream, the new, and there's always an attempt to bring something which, because the old gets boring very quickly. And so the new world, new consciousness, we've heard this phrase, new world, when there was the first war in Iraq, Desert Storm, and there was talk by politicians of the world of a new world order. And we have heard this other times in different ways also. It's the same with new consciousness. You'll find a lot of new age teachers speaking of new consciousness, And if one is not careful, one would say, yes, it's all the same thing. They're all talking of new consciousness, new world. No, they're not. We have to be careful what we mean by new consciousness in our context, in the context of Sri Aurobindo's teaching. And what is this new world in their context? So when Sri Aurobindo and the mother speak of a new consciousness, it is something which has never been before on the earth. Okay, you can still say the new age is about new things which have never been. But they're very specific. It is the consciousness of the supramental, the supermind. And the new world is a world which is formed based on the truth of the supermind. And so now we come to the question, what is this supermind and where does it come from? Is it their invention? In the afternoon session, we will be discussing how the supermind is described in the Vedas, in the ancient traditions, and how it has been subsequently misunderstood or misrepresented in popular communications. But for now, we will dwell on the idea of what it is that he refers to as supermind and try to understand what it is. It's not enough to have a jargon, another new word. And to understand it, you have a problem because it's like trying to explain to a monkey what is logic. Yes, we experience logic. How did you learn logic? You sat in school and studied logic? No, you already had logic long before you studied logic. In studying logic, you only formalized what you already intuitively knew and had. You gave a vocabulary to it, you played with it in more structured forms. But the instinct of logical thought is already inherent to the human being. And so when a monkey watches a human being play with symbols of logic, doing equations perhaps on paper, or arguing out, he does not follow what it is that you're doing. If he were to watch you read a novel, for example, he would see the human being take a book, stare at this scroll of black ink on white paper, and suddenly the human being smiles. And then he laughs. And then he stares a little more, becomes serious, and has tears. So the monkey picks up the book. Maybe he's got it upside down because for him it's just a scroll of ink on paper. Doesn't matter. He stares at it, laughs, and cries and says, see, I have got logic. I am experiencing the human novel. And the human beings will say, no, you haven't got it yet. It's not the way you smile and laugh staring at paper. It's what you think, it's what you experience inside. That's the real human experience. And the monkey says, I'm experiencing stuff. And the man says, no, that's not what I experience. And this is the problem we have when the human mind now turns to something above mind. The one who lives in that will tell you, no, you have not got it yet. But you say, yes, I have got it. I read Sri Aurobindo's description of what is supermind and I have understood it. But that's not the experience of it. And you have not yet got it. And so is there a way out? The only way you could say it's a tautology. Experience it, then you will know. And until you experience it, you can't know. And since you can't know, you can't experience it, you're stuck. And then you fall back to some formula which says, okay, wait and pray and offer yourself and surrender and the mother will make it happen in you. Okay, there are people who have done that also. So Sri Aurobindo offers us something which is much more very valuable. He not only explains rationally what is the supermind in a way that the rational mind can understand, but also beginning with a rational approach, he lifts you into an intuitive glimpse of it. And then in your own mind's higher parts, it's as if you begin to sense the truth of the supermind, can feel it as a living force, as a presence, as a power, and even get glimpses of how it works, how it thinks, how it sees things. And there's a whole series of gradations of this ascent which opens you to that. Eventually, until your mind is ready enough that that can form itself into you. In a very telling discussion, the mother snubs one of the persons who keeps asking certain questions about supermind, and she says, well, do you think you can rise to supermind consciousness and get it? Just try. It'll be fun to watch that. So it's like being telling the monkey, do you think you can just sit down and stare at things and start thinking with rational terms? No. The consciousness of rationality has to settle in the monkey mind, for which the monkey mind has to be prepared and made ready and open to the possibility of that higher thing settling in, which did happen at some point when the transition from the monkey to human took place. And the same applies to the human consciousness. We can't think ourselves into supermind consciousness, but we can prepare the mind that it can open up and that higher possibility settle into it, begin by reflections and through various gradations establish itself. And Sri Aurobindo minutely describes the gradations, the stages, the steps of the ascent. And we find there's something so beautiful, there's a continuity of it. There's a continuity of consciousness. There's never a leap where something is disconnected from the previous. There's always a continuity. And he writes in a way that begins by tapping the rational mind and then gently drifts up all those gradations. And so as you read him, if you allow your mind to be open to his consciousness and do not limit yourself to only a rational process, he lifts your rational mind and frees it from its limitations of rationality and takes you to glimpses of the things higher. And in some of the most powerful, intense passages of Savitri, it is actually a formulation of that highest consciousness taking form through words. And so when you read it, it touches you on so many levels. You're reading it and there's a rational part which understands it on one level. There's an intuitive part which understands on deeper levels for which you have no words to express. You read it and you say, wow. And someone asks, what was wow about it? I can't express it. But if I try to express in rational terms, I speak something and then I feel, no, that's not what I meant to say. I just don't have means to express what I'm feeling. And that's fine. And we can train ourselves to remain in that part where you feel the wow and you don't know how to articulate it and stay there and habituate yourself to remain there. And that's already preparing your mind to rise above rationality. And so Sri Aurobindo's writings are a very powerful means for transforming, changing the form and rising above the limitation of current form, transforming the mind and raising the consciousness to higher and higher levels. And that's the reason why when you reread, you understand deeply, more richly, differently each time. Because your mind is changed in the very act of reading. So that's why Mother's recommendation in reading was, make your mind silent. Open your heart to his consciousness. And then let the words that you read form the experience, or let the experience come into you. And let it lead you, let him lead you. So when we read Sri Aurobindo's descriptions of the supermind, in the very act of reading that description, there's something which begins to happen within us. So for now, I will not read a text. I would rather put in words, in a simplified context, what it is that he describes. And I would recommend that you read on your own and let him lead you into the glimpses of higher experiences. So for the rational mind, we see something very important, a continuity from below up to where we are. And that's within the range of experience. We see, for example, in so-called dead matter, there is no consciousness, or at least there's no consciousness that we can be aware of. We can say it is subconscious, sleeping consciousness. In the plant, we see consciousness and response through sensations, but not in an emotional response the way we feel emotions. And in the animals, we feel much more directly an emotional contact and expression, the way we feel them, and sometimes even they are more intense, more loving in their emotions than even we can be. And then in the higher animals, we see even complex, rational responses, logical and sometimes very complex communications and behavior, approaching the human with the difference that they can't speak the way we speak. And then we see in the human baby a similar advanced animal like expression, not being able to speak. And as the child grows up, we see the articulation. At an age perhaps of 9 or 10, the child senses logically but cannot articulate in rational terms to argue out with you, but he knows what's right and what's not. And then as he grows older and the higher faculties of the mind become more formed, he's able to argue out with you. And does this change stop here? Sri Aurobindo says it would be a pity if it stopped here. And it cannot be the highest that nature can produce. There must be something more. But is it just our fantasy to imagine that there's something more? Sri Aurobindo says, observe what are your highest aspirations. And you notice that this whole logical thinking of the mind is going in a certain direction, aiming for something which your highest and deepest aspirations point to, but which the logical mind is unable to reach and falls back from, falls short somehow. And perhaps the most obvious forms in which our higher aspirations are recognized, which are unreachable, are our aspirations for truth, justice, beauty, true love, perfect harmony, and we feel it should be possible. We even find our highest attainments as human beings, even rational human beings, our highest attainments are when we move in these directions. I'll take a very crude example perhaps, but which is accessible today for the current mind of humanity and which is part of our living experience through our mobile phones. When we use these apps, I use an app to buy something online. All of us must have done that, I think. We also use the apps to hail a taxi or to share a car, carpool with each other, etc. Notice what's behind it. Behind it is the idea that I should be able to enter in perfect harmony with everything that's out there so that my exact need matches with the exact thing available there. You go to a shop, you're stuck with what's available there, not good enough. I wish I could go to that shop which is bigger, which has a greater variety, to get the right thing which I want, the dress that fits me exactly with the color that I can visualize in my mind and which fits my waist to precision, to the millimeter, as I am today, having lost weight or having put on weight. And I can't find it in the store because the store will keep only what's most popular, which moves fastest. But when I get online, I have access to literally millions of clothes. I don't need to look at all of them. I quickly filter down to what I want and puff, I got it, and it comes to my home. The attempt here is to harmonize my need with the reality outside. When I'm hailing a taxi, I want the closest taxi to come. I don't want to have to phone my regular taxi guy who's 10 miles away. I want the taxi which is waiting idle half a mile away, but I have no way to know him. But the apps do that. They somehow connect all of us in some way, put in harmony, and suddenly the quality of life changes. And that app becomes hugely successful. Why? Because it expressed something, some possibility in the direction of my ideal to have a life in perfect harmony with my environment. Isn't it? It's these aspirations of our highest ideals which represent our highest potential, but which point also to a possibility which is above the rational mind. Because when you try to put things in harmony, just a few human beings working together, we find out how difficult it is. It's easy to do it with cars because you're limiting it to physical objects and with clothes. But when you interact with people and try to be in harmony, it's so much more difficult. A word spoken, a tone which is slightly off because my stomach was aching, gets the other person to misunderstand me and starts a whole chain of misunderstandings. Something is missing here. What's missing? Somehow the other person is unable to feel what I'm feeling. I am unable to know what your deepest thought is. I have to hear your words, stare at your expression. You just said something weird, and I look at your face, look at your eyes. Are you joking? Are you serious? And I have to guess. I have to guess what the thought, what the intent is. And often there are cultural differences. The guy is nodding his head, moving his head like this. Does he mean yes or no? It's a common problem Westerners have when they go to India. And I explain to them there's actually a very specific meaning to this, which is not possible in the English language because of limitations of the Indian English language. In English, you have yes and you have no, but in Indian languages, you have okay, yes, and no. There's a difference. Okay is that's okay with me. Yes is an affirmation, which is different from an agreement. You get it? And this head movement is an okay. This is yes. But there are cultures where this is no. In some of the Arabic countries, this means no. I violently disagree when I nod my head like this. How do I know what's happening inside your mind? I cannot. And that shows a limitation of the capacity of the mind. And yet there are people, the horse whisperer. Have you heard about that? Or the dog whisperer. They come to the dog, and this dog who's ferocious, who's biting at everyone, this guy approaches, smiles at him, gently reaches out and pats him, throws him a biscuit, and within 2 minutes the dog is lapping, playing with him, taking all his orders. What did he do? Can he teach me what he did? The problem is he can't teach, even if he tries. Yes, he can teach you techniques and methods, but after all the techniques and methods learned, this man does in 2 minutes what I take 20 minutes to do with all the techniques which I learned from him. It's not the technique, there's something else. There's an ability of the consciousness to reach out and connect directly and to know. Not only to know what's in the other, but to convey what's in me directly. And this is not part of the natural capacity of the rational mind. It belongs to a domain which is behind or above. But if I cannot tap into this capacity, there is no surety of harmony. You want to attain to perfect harmony, you have to tap into this capacity, which does not belong to rational mind, but which is there in us, undeveloped, untapped. I could consciously develop it and tap it. And as I begin to develop it and begin to apply it more and more directly, notice what happens. I do not need to use my rational mind anymore. If I can meet with this dog and connect directly, where's the need for the rational mind? If I meet another human being and we connect in consciousness, you know exactly what I want to say and I know exactly what you're responding. Do you need words? Do you need to argue out things? If I meet, let's say we are now a group of 5 people, the same group that was trying to work in perfect harmony and couldn't, and now we meet and we become very quiet and we connect to our highest aspiration, we relate to each other on a deeper level, and then we begin to work, spontaneously we work better, in better harmony. And we rarely need to speak too much. We seem as if to fall into sync automatically. And this is attempted today indirectly in many management training programs by taking you out into the forest and going through some kind of a major survival exercise. Climb something together, do something together involving survival, where each one is forced to set aside their personal ego and tune in and join with the group collective identity. It's not quite the same thing, but it gets you close enough. You are now in a group identity, now in a group ego. The consciousness which unites you has transcended the individual consciousness, but it could still be a rational mental consciousness with a bit of empathy or sympathy thrown in. It is not a higher consciousness that sees more deeply. It is the consciousness of the wolf pack, the group. But there is a higher consciousness which sees more deeply. It senses not only your thoughts and feelings, but it senses your deepest aspirations. All of us have, perhaps, if we're lucky enough, 1 or 2 really good friends. the kind that you can sit with and don't need to talk, who always understands you and never misunderstands, knows exactly what you're thinking and feeling, isn't it? But it's possible to feel directly another person as profoundly, as deeply, even on a first meeting, if you are conscious of those layers within you. And so we recognize that all of what we have in our current personality is good, but not enough to realize those high ideals, for which we need to go deeper and higher. And as we begin to get into those higher states or deeper states, we realize we're thinking differently. Our awareness is of a different category, our values are different. Now, for a consciousness which sees deeply, let's say, or which sees even widely, which senses things across time, senses not only what is your deepest aspiration, but senses what is the arc of your journey in life. What is it that your highest aspiration points to? What it is that you are intended to fulfill in this life? Your current words and your current behavior don't matter too much. It's like this little child sitting in his mother's arms, and the child is upset for some reason and starts beating its mother. Does the mother get angry? Oh, she says, oh, this fellow is really upset. Why? Because she knows he's a kid, he's going through a mood, he's cranky right now. But that's not him. The real him loves me and I love him. So when you're experiencing this thing deeper in a person, your behavior changes. The mother put up with a lot with human beings because she saw deeply inside us. She saw always these deeper possibilities. And whatever was in front was things to be born. People lied to her openly. She saw through the lie, she saw what was true behind, and she smiled. And if at that point she said, you're lying to me, next time the guy would not come to her perhaps, would hide even more the lie which she had. So the right action for her was to pretend as if she believed the lie, so that this guy can continue to come to her with an open heart and mind, and gently through that become more and more open until he realizes he doesn't need to lie. And you see, the whole pattern of behavior changes just with this one shift in how you see things. And we're still in the domain of mind, but deeper and higher ranges. And imagine if you continue in this way to higher and higher levels, there will come a point where you will feel the human consciousness so alien, isn't it? Well, let's look at what's the direction in which this whole transition takes us. The first step out of the human narrow band of thinking processes is a mind which is wider and freer. And this is something which is accessible to us. And of course, there are always degrees within it. And this wider and freer mind looks at not just one or two things at a time, as we are used to, but looks at all the things around us in a larger vision. It's like this. When you walk into your house, if you had blinkers like a horse, you'd first look down to see where you're stepping, everything's clear. Then you would look up to see what's in front of you. Then you look to the side to see where you want to go. Meanwhile, something could have slipped, the dog could have come near your feet, and you would still trip. Because at any given moment, you're never seeing the full picture. You're seeing a piece. And so, having looked to where you want to go, you need to look down again to see that nothing is in the way of your feet. And again, look up, and you keep moving around looking at pieces after each other. Remove the blinkers, and suddenly you see the whole room. The shift from the rational, narrow rational mind in which we are normally living to the higher mind is like this, as if a removal of blinkers. The first thing is, you see a single statement, a single sentence is seen in context of all the things around it. A single statement is seen in all of its possibilities of interpretation, of understanding. A single idea is seen in relation to all its limitations and all its strengths and all the things like a cluster. Suddenly, all of that is in one go seen. And you still have to go through a process of thinking out. But the scope of what you're thinking out is much larger, much more complete. And it can grow larger and larger and larger. But the one special feature which distinguishes, it's not just larger and narrower, the one special feature which distinguishes this higher mind is that behind this larger picture which you're already seeing, freed, more flexible working of mind, is the sense of something which is complete, something which is vast, something which is large in space, in time, in universality, the sense of the self. Now, there are gradations. As the mind awakens into higher mind, at first you're just seeing largely more completely, and that's already a behavior which we would classify as genius. That's what most geniuses are able to do. They're able to see things out of box, out of context, and see the larger picture and suddenly make connections which we could not have done on our own, or if we had spent a very long time trying out different things, but they seem to get it straight away. That's already genius behavior. So genius behavior is still higher possibilities of the intellect. But that can grow into something where eventually one senses as if this backdrop of the self. Something vast, timeless, infinite, one, upholding, supporting this whole totality of the universe. And whatever you see, a single idea, behind that is this. At first subliminally, later more and more consciously. Everything is seen in context of the all, the self. But still, the mind is in a process of thinking it out, logicizing, rationalizing, dealing with pieces. And there's a process of thinking. In the thinking process, you may still make errors. And this domain Sri Aurobindo calls higher mind. One of its characteristics is the ability to, because you're seeing everything in one go in a larger group, you're able to think as if in multiple ideas at the same time. Mass ideation is the term that Sri Aurobindo uses. It's a bit like parallel processing. But above this, as the mind continues to grow and ascend in this wider consciousness, you discover that you are seeing the more than thinking out. You walk into the room and there's a thinking process. Let's say the room is dark. So you walk into the room and you extend with your hand and try to feel out. Is there a chair here? Is there a table here? Is there a vase? I have to be careful. And as you're feeling out, in your mind, you're creating a map. Chair, table, vase, water in the vase, flowers in the vase, and you're creating a picture. Once the picture is formed, I can move around in this dark room reasonably safe unless something changes. Right? But I could make a mistake. I touched this thing, it felt like a table. Actually, it was not a table, it was some fancy new sofa. And I could make a mistake because I don't really know, I don't truly see. And I live in a map which my mind has created of the reality which I have glimpsed in pieces. This is how the rational mind works. Right now, everything which you see with your eyes, every idea you have, has a representation in your mind, which is what you are dealing with. Oh, that person is a crook. Where do you get that idea? Oh, so-and-so told me that fellow is a crook, never trust him. You have never met the person. You have never experienced the direct contact of consciousness with a person. You have an image of a person, idea of a person, representation of a person. But it's like that with everything. I bring a bouquet of flowers. Oh, that's such and such a rose. Oh yeah, sure. You're used to labeling it a rose. But did you meet this fellow, this person? Oh yeah, I know it's a rose. No, meet this particular flower. You're not meeting the flower, you're meeting idea of flower which is in your mind and you dismiss it. But if you set aside all those ideas and just looked at this one thing, person, being, and related to it, oh, what a special person. Idea of rose is irrelevant. The experience of contact with this consciousness is a different story. But in the intellect, everything is a representation and dealing with the representations in your mind. And that's where we make errors. So every now and then we have to correct it. Oh yeah, this person actually turned out to be really good. I thought he was a bad guy. He's a really good guy. And now I need to change my representation of him. So we're always creating our own reality in representation, because that's the process the mind works. But now in this room where you created a representation map, let's say the light slowly comes on. Now you don't need to create a representation map. You see things for where they are, isn't it? In a way, this faculty of seeing things in proper place is already functioning in us, but it's behind the activity of representation of the mind. So in your mind, you have pictures. You're forming pictures all the time of things, of people, of relationships. And as this widening takes place in the higher mind, the seeing ability becomes more and more direct. You see things for what they are. And there's as if a dawning of light until eventually the thinking out process where you feel and create representations, that fades. And there's a direct seeing which replaces it. And this Sri Aurobindo calls the illumined mind. The nature of the illumined mind is that it no more has to go through a process of thinking out. Something is given and you see. You see it for what it is, you see it for its relationship with everything else, and it's obvious. Not to take this as an example, but it's indicative of still higher possibilities. When once the mother was approached by the engineering head of the ashram, they were building the Golconda and they had a problem because the architect had made a design which required something that they could not solve from the engineering point of view. They tried to put a pillar, they needed to create a special support, they couldn't put a pillar that solved the load balancing problem. So this chief engineer, Vishwanatha, went to the mother and said, "Mother, we have a problem, we can't do this, we can't solve this problem." So mother said, "Bring me the map." So bring me the drawings. They got the drawing here. Mother took a pencil and marked a spot and said, "Put a pillar here." And this guy goes back and he does all his calculations and he said everything was solved after that. The problem was completely solved. And so he went back to the mother and mother, you were not trained in engineering. How could you figure out that you should put a pillar there? And Vishwanatha narrated this to us. He said, mother smiled at it and said, "Oh, I just looked at it and it was obvious." That's all. But this ability to see direct is natural in this illumined mind. It's obvious. You see it because you see the thing, not its representation which you create in your mind. But still you're dealing with pieces, you're dealing with objects, and they are separate from you and you have to see them. Now observe, as you see things more and more directly, even with the current consciousness of the rational mind, you can begin to see it more deeply, more completely. So let's say I bring you the picture of I bring you a rose, and you see the front of the rose. Did you look at the back of the rose? Normally not. Okay, let's look at the back. Did you see it from the side? Okay. Did you see from the other side? Okay, I turn it. Did you see inside? Okay, I have to move the petals to look inside. At any given point, I'm seeing a viewpoint. Right? Can you see all those viewpoints at the same time? That's difficult. Your mind can visualize one facet and then another facet and another and keep rotating, but it doesn't see simultaneously the front and the back, right? But if you do this practice, turn it around and look from all sides again and again, until at some point something happens where your consciousness begins as if to identify from all sides. Try this as an experiment. Visualize the rose now from the front and from the back and from the sides at the same time. And after a while, you'll find the picturing ability of the mind shuts down and you feel the rose from all sides rather. You feel in a kind of an identification. And at that point, you break through to a different way of knowing, which is by feeling with a kind of an identification, identity. And that's the shift from the illumined mind to the intuitive mind. And the character of the intuitive mind is the gap between I, the observer, and the thing itself which I am observing. That gap fades out and I become one with it. And now when I look at the rose, I'm feeling the rose inside out. I'm feeling the rose as the rose feels itself to be. And how does the rose feel itself to be? It does not feel its outer petals first. It feels itself inside. How do you feel yourself to be? Do you feel your skin first and then the heart after, or you feel your heart first and then your body is an expression of your feelings, of your heart, of your thoughts, of your aspirations? And same with the rose. It's the inside out experience, which is what the rose experiences of itself. The petals are only a covering or an expression, a reflection of what is its deepest movement of blooming, of expressing. And so in the intuitive consciousness, when I see rose and experience rose and know rose, I know it inside out, not outside in. This is where you have the great example of the seven wise men checking out the elephant. They are blind, seven blind men, sorry, who are also wise perhaps. But they're checking out the elephant, and one fellow grabs the tail, one fellow grabs the leg, one fellow grabs the trunk, one fellow grabs the ears. And so their description of the elephant is totally different. But if you knew elephant in an intuitive consciousness, you'd experience not trunk and legs and tail, you'd experience elephantness of the elephant. What does it feel like to be elephant? You'll feel its consciousness. You'll feel the way it relates to things, to world. And then the body itself is an expression of that. The trunk and the legs are limbs extending out from this central what I am, elephantness. Okay. This now already becomes a great difference between the way the rational mind approaches, catching pieces and joining them, analyzing, synthesizing, and the intuitive consciousness which sees straight, experiences what is inside, and inside out experiences all the parts. But one thing at a time. In the intuitive consciousness, therefore, for the first time, we can experience freedom from error. In part. Because you know the thing for itself. You know it as it knows itself. But it stops with that thing. The moment you go beyond its scope, you can make errors. Till then, as long as you're dealing with representations, constructions, reflections, analyzing, synthesizing, and playing around with ideas, you can make errors, and you will always make errors. But in the intuitive consciousness, for the first time, you get glimpses of error-free knowledge, but in pieces. And the beauty of the intuition is that it knows its own limits. I know flowerness of the rose, and I know it stops here. I don't know anything beyond that. I don't know the plantness of the plant from which the rose blooms, not yet. But because the intuitive consciousness identifies, when it turns its attention, oh, what is the plantness from which I have emerged? It turns to plant and poof, it identifies and it experiences the plantness of the rose bush and its relationship with the seasons and the soil. And so I walk up to the rose bush and I can feel, oh, this bush is suffering because the soil is too acid. And that's the true gardener. You have people who have historically demonstrated extraordinary abilities in their relationship with plants. Who's the man who did the peanuts in the US?
George Washington Carver.
George Washington Carver. I think he's the one who could literally see plants at their seedling stage and know what they would be, and remove the ones which he didn't want. And so within 2 or 3 generations, he could create a very specialized species of a plant. At the seed stage or at the sprouting stage, he could recognize the potential, what it's going to be, and already make the selections he wanted. And this would be the character of the intuitive consciousness. But it will make errors outside its immediate moment of identification of the intuition. So the intuition is often described as coming in a flash, a glimpse of a part, a light shining like the stab of a torch in the dark room. It shows you in the spot what the thing is, but it also knows its own limits. Beyond that, there's darkness. But you could have a series of flashes and create a chain and get whatever particular knowledge you wanted. But you would still miss out something which was outside the scope of what you looked for to know. And so we realize the intuition, although gives you a glimpse of correct knowledge, error-free knowledge, has a limit, and that limit can widen. The flash of intuition, the beam of the torch can be wider and wider and wider, right? And so as the intuitive consciousness itself widens and opens out, you see more, truly, deeply, completely. deeper from inside out, wider in the scope of its chain of relationships and effects and influences. So I look at this rose, and I know the rose bush, and I know the context of the garden, and the garden in the context of the environment around, perhaps, if it's wide enough. But even within that, I may turn to focus on more detail or broaden or narrow my focus. And here comes the next step inevitably. There must be a point where it widens enough that I know the rose in context of the bush and the garden and the environment and the earth and the solar system and the universe and the whole thing in context, the rose in context of the whole universe. And it is here that the intuitive consciousness rises to one more grade where now you have the wideness of the cosmos as the base for the focus of the intuition. And this we call the over-mental consciousness. In the over-mental consciousness, you have the perspective of the all, but seeing from a point, a focus, a part which is highlighted, which is exaggerated, a perspective, but on the whole universe. And in this consciousness, as you move around, everything you see is felt as if the entire universe leaning forward to put up this front. This rose is the whole universe coming forward and meeting me as this rose. And this dog which is coming and barking at me is the whole universe representing itself through form of dog. And I feel the continuity. I know the oneness of it all. Ramakrishna Paramahansa, in his life, had many interesting experiences. One such is when he watches a bull being whipped, and spontaneously he enters in identification with it, and immediately he begins to feel the pain of the whiplashes on his back, and he starts shouting, "Ow, ow, that's hurting." And on the back, the form, the mark of the whiplashes appear. In the identification, there was even a physical identification, that you felt anything outside you as a part of yourself, as an extension of yourself. The distinctions now are so silly. You say that this plant is different from that plant. No, it's not. It is one single universe putting forward this plant, putting forward that plant as different faces of itself simultaneously. It's like when you watch a wave on the ocean and you see the bubbles burst in the spray. The intellect would see a single point of the spray, a single bubble, or a single drop, and say, this is one thing, that is another thing, that is another thing. And the foam of the wave will say, this is separate bubble, that is separate bubble. And I will analyze the relationships of these and make a theory out of it. That's the intellect. The intuitive consciousness feels the surge of the wave and the spray of the bubbles. But the overmental consciousness experiences the whole ocean leaning forward to form a wave and spray in so many bubbles. Each bubble is the whole ocean putting up a special front. But the overmental consciousness is still seeing from the perspective of the wave, the whole ocean, and then the other wave, the whole ocean. So it is in the overmental consciousness that we find cosmic experience, true cosmic experience. So you can experience universality on every level. Take LSD, you will experience universality at the level of consciousness at which you live. But your registration of universality will be limited to your capacity to register in the fragmented consciousness you have. You do not have true universality. True cosmic consciousness is when you register cosmos as it knows itself, not in terms of your little reduced perspective. So it is in the overmental consciousness that you can begin to experience cosmos for what it is. And then you still have a problem, because you can experience cosmos from this perspective and from that perspective and from the other. But everything is cosmic. And it is here that we find the highest deities, the gods, the higher gods. They are each of them functionaries, powers that act on a cosmic level, but each has its own priority, its perspective, its aspect, its special role and function. And two of them can enter in conflict with each other, because they highlight a special aspect each. So even in the overmental consciousness, although cosmic, although experiencing unity with the whole cosmos, you can still have conflict and differences. And sometimes the differences can be so massive because they are cosmic beings that they are cosmic conflicts. It is an interesting idea. At the level of the government, you can have massive conflicts and massive errors, massive disharmonies. And so there has to be one more level after this, where you experience all these different, massively distinct aspects as facets of a single oneness. Inevitably, one more step. And you have a consciousness which sees the all from every possible perspective at the same time and knows all these perspectives as part of a single seeing, knowing identity. That then becomes supermind, supramental consciousness. And its theme is unity, oneness. There is no other. There is only the one. And the one, being the center of it, has infinite aspects, infinite facets, infinite waves can flow from it. And all possible waves are held and known simultaneously as facets of itself. Now, this is not only in consciousness that you're aware, but you're also one in identity, in substance with all things. So there is a supramental substantiality, a substance which experiences the oneness of all things. And when this substance awareness, which is one, now chooses to lean to highlight a particular aspect of itself, it knows that aspect and it knows another aspect as itself, its own two arms, so to say. It never loses the oneness. It never enters in conflict, even when it plays with aspects of itself. It's when the arm separates and says, I am all, that it can enter in conflict with the other arm. Those are the gods. But in the supramental consciousness, it is Ishvara, the Lord himself, of which all the gods are aspects, facets, special emanations and functions. And so it is in the supramental consciousness that you have all knowledge, all unity. So omniscience would be natural there, effortless. Also omnipotence, and it's interesting to see how. When you are one with all, and then you choose to act, where is the action originating from? From the oneness, right? But even if the action is moving through a single gesture of plucking the flower, the consciousness is in oneness with the whole universe, including the garden, including the bush, and the flower and all its petals, and the bees which are trying to come to the flower to take off its nectar. And so as you pluck the flower, you are in conscious identity with all these things and in perfect harmony with them. And your gesture of plucking will not be opposed by anything because all is yourself. So when you act, there is no resistance, there is no opposition, because anything which could oppose you is a part of yourself. And since you are choosing to act, all of those parts are in perfect harmony. It's spontaneous, effortless action. There's no opposition. There's no other. There is no conflict. And if at all there's opposition, it's like I pull my hands like this. It's just me playing with myself in my own energy, pulling, pushing for the purpose of the play. But there's no real opposition, nothing really opposing. Therefore, all action from the supermind is spontaneous, effortless, and massive in its context. Even if the result is seen in the flower being plucked, the action itself is on the whole cosmos, because all is involved in that single action. The Buddha makes this observation. If you move your finger, the stars change their orbits. This glimpse one has when one is in a consciousness which is cosmic. But in this case, when I move my finger, I am moving the stars in their orbits to match the perfect harmony with the finger's movements. That's the supramental experience. And so, a supramental consciousness never experiences otherness in conflict. This is the point I tried to make yesterday. If somebody opposes a supramental consciousness, the opposition is a part of me anyway, and I use it to further my own objective. And this point Sri Aurobindo makes, it is only in this supramental consciousness that one has the full power, omnipotence, to overcome any opposition. however powerful, however massive. Now, in this whole gradation of ascents, you see a continuity. At no point was there something which you broke away from. There was always a transition, a smooth passage from one to the next. But each passage, each step was a widening, a freeing up, a rising to something more true, more direct, more intimate, more essential. And so, this movement of the ascending consciousness, you see how it aligns perfectly with what we have in our mind and our hearts as our highest ideals. What you dream as the ideal harmony, ideal love, ideal justice, ideal truth, they're all really movements in this direction upwards and culminate in their highest in the supramental consciousness. It is the supermind alone which can fulfill perfectly the highest ideals. Of course, intermediate levels can fulfill ideals to intermediate levels, to intermediate degrees, and you might be satisfied with that. I experience a working harmony in our group, perfect. But our group feels a tension with the rest of us out there, with the world perhaps. Sri Aurobindo describes this in the transition to a supramental consciousness, not only individual but in a collective life. As this higher begins to act in the overmental consciousness and in a collective expression of the overmental consciousness, he says, there will not necessarily be an obvious harmony. There may even be extremes of conflict. Each community will be like an island separate from the others, and each will be so distinct because it manifests an aspect and a facet which is not compatible with another facet. And we're seeing a tendency in this direction in the current phase where you have large group movements, large organizations, each highlighting something but somehow totally incompatible with others. You can't split yourself to be here and there at the same time. There's something which is not common. And it is only when we transition from the overmental to the supramental consciousness that you can have a collectivity, a community which meets the whole universe and all impacts from the universe and is able to deal with them in harmony without being overwhelmed, without being defeated by any opposition. That's the challenge today. So in this perspective, we see how supermind is not only the highest, but it's also the origin for everything else. It is the unity of the divine consciousness out of which the multiplicity emerges. But it is in supermind that you know both unity and multiplicity. But multiplicity is known as an expression of the unity. There's never a conflict between the two. Now, all of this is to give you a rational understanding. But you notice in the rational understanding, what is leading the rational exploration is something deep inside which knows, which senses, which says, yes, it's possible, it's true, it's real. And I know there's one more step. And it leads you. It leads the mind from behind. Something deep within us knows the truth of these because it is in alignment with them. It is those levels of consciousness. Only we are not conscious of those parts. We are not conscious in those parts. And those parts and their functions are not organized in us. Gradually, as we become conscious of those parts, as we awaken in those parts and organize those parts and their functions, we are growing in our evolution, ascending in our consciousness. That's all evolution is. Evolution is nothing but something which is already within you, so far undeveloped, but existing as a potential, as a reality, now coming forward, coming into domain of awareness and getting more and more organized. And if you think of it in this way, this routine which we just went through to recognize the continuity with the supermind, just the fact that we could do that and feel the truth of it somewhere deep inside us is a promise that we can attain to it in living complete experience. It sounds a bit perhaps presumptuous, but this is the truth of it. If supermind did not exist, if there was no relation from us, our consciousness to the supermind, we couldn't even conceive of it. We wouldn't feel the resonance of its truth. And this is what we have to catch. Every time when you read Sri Aurobindo, and he is describing, as we read the passage this morning, He's describing things which are just outside your immediate irrational field, but which are living, which have a living force. And you feel the living force, you know you can attain it because something within you resonates with it already. So supermind is not a faraway ideal objective consciousness of some extraordinary transcendence. Yes, it is all that also, but there's a continuity. And it is an intimate part of us. Nothing in the universe could exist without supermind. So having said this, I step back from the whole universe and look at this from a different perspective now. In the divine consciousness, in Brahman, in the totality of the One, all possibilities can exist, do exist. Everything you can imagine, everything that could be, could not be, the fact that you can imagine it exists in that totality. When from that totality of Brahman, there's the bursting out into manifestation, and everything is thrown out into manifestation, what would you get? Chaos. Like in your attic, everything is just thrown pell-mell. That's not universe, that's not cosmos. There is in the Brahman consciousness the power that sees all infinite potential, infinite possibility, and then organizes and places them in right relation with each other. So that in the manifestation there is an unfolding sequence. Things flow from one to the other in a natural chain. Things are held in balance in relationship with each other. Relationships that you can actually describe in mathematical terms. Or rather, mathematics is possible because things are held in a relationship. You understand? This power which organizes it is the power of supermind. It's supermind which takes all this infinite potential, places it all in right relation, in space and time, and then flows it into manifestation. Is in power of knowledge and of power, which makes for the universe to be a cosmos. It is because supermind organizes all possibilities that the mind can observe those possibilities and make laws out of them. We observe this and we say, that's the law of physics. Who made that law? What enforces the law? We don't know. But that's what we observe. But it is the free expression of supermind which you're only describing when you do your physics or chemistry or biology or whatever study. Seen from this perspective, the human mind looks on the wonder of this manifestation and tries to understand in what a wonderful way the divine has organized it. And we categorize the beauty of that organization, its free play, and that's what we call human knowledge. That's why this knowledge is called an inferior knowledge, whereas that knowledge which holds it in the unity and sees perfectly the relations is called higher knowledge, divine knowledge. But this and that, there's a relationship. Yes.
So, is there a difference between super consciousness and supermind?
So when you say super consciousness, it could mean any gradation which is above your current level of awareness. Any of these gradations.
Supra.
Supra, the word supra would be anything which exceeds. Okay, so you could say super comes from that. Superman, as in Batman, Ant-Man, and Superman, is anything exceeding the human norm, with powers greater than the human. But if you see the nature of Superman, he's still a rational being. He just is more powerful. He has X-ray vision. His abilities of the senses are more developed. But he's still a rational, intellectual being who can make errors, who does not see truth. His actions are not always true. He is not an expression of a truth consciousness. So with Batman. So they categorize, they would come into the category of what we would call Nietzsche's Superman. An aggrandized, dramatized, exaggerated human being. And Sri Aurobindo takes trouble to point out the Superman he's referring to is a supramental consciousness organized in the human. And a consciousness which sees oneness and knows oneness cannot act like Superman or Batman. They would have it would have extraordinary capacities, but its basis of motivation and relating to things would be fundamentally different. It would not see otherness. It would always see harmony, and its actions would be free of error. Yes.
modern physics, astronomy tells us about the vastness of the universe, which we all have some idea. When the mother and Sri Aurobindo talk about the word earth, do they mean this physical planet? Or do they mean a certain state of consciousness?
So
And when they talk about men, they mean the man human being or any such level of consciousness anywhere in the universe?
yes. So it varies in context. Sometimes they will use the word earth to mean the physical plane as distinct from other planes. You see, when you're living in a consciousness in which all these levels are simultaneously available to you, what do you call this domain of matter? You say the material world, but that's too long, so you say earth, because mostly for us it means that. But also there is a context where they use earth to mean this planet as distinct from other planets. I think I had read somewhere Sri Aurobindo's writing where he says, in this particular incarnation, they're too concerned with the earth to worry about other planets. The focus of their work is for this physical earth. And in the same, when they say man, capital M, it is the man species of humanity would include other planets and other beings who are living in the mental consciousness, rational. And the same evolutionary principles would apply anywhere in the universe.
Okay. Do they also mean that there are no higher beings evolved so far, or this is the only?
So they do not tell us explicitly about other people being evolved elsewhere, but if you just apply basic logic, on Earth we have had people who have evolved above intellect. There have been saints who have lived in intuitive consciousness, there are people who have lived in overmental consciousness. Some of the Vedic rishis had supramental experiences. So all of these being possible on the earth could be possible anywhere else.
They're individuals as opposed to a whole race.
Could be possible anywhere else. And even a group could exist living in higher states of consciousness. The difference though with Sri Aurobindo's particular message here, it's not just about rising into a supramental consciousness, which we could do and we could abandon the mind in the process even, but it is about now manifesting that consciousness not just in a body which is defective and organized with the brain mind of the rational intellect, but transforming the mind and the body to become true vehicles worthy of the supramental consciousness. For example, you could be an intelligent human being. Your biology could be constrained. You are paraplegic, for example. Can you be a full expression of the intellectual potential? No. Your speech is blocked. Can you express your intellectual potential? No. When the supramental tries to act through the mind which is a fragmenting consciousness acting through representation and breaking truth, the very act of manifesting through the mind would distort the supramental consciousness, and what would come through would be erroneous. Can the mind now be liberated enough? The mind embodied, can it be liberated enough that it can experience the supramental consciousness fully and manifest it without distortion? This is Sri Aurobindo's objective. Subsequently, can the body itself embody the supramental consciousness and overcome its limitation and be a true expression of a supramental substance? This is what he calls the supramental transformation. Yeah.
On that note, I was wondering if you could share with us the relationship of the vital with the supramental.
Yes. So, mind, life energy, that is vital, and the physical body are the three vehicles through which the psychic being soul acts in the material world. You knock out these three, there's a bomb explosion, my body gets blasted up, soul is still there, vital is still there, mind is still there. Suddenly, this physical appearance begins to fade, and I begin to see the world as it is in the vital and mental domains. I didn't move, I did nothing. My vehicle to engage with material substance was knocked out. You see, if your eyes are suddenly shut out, you don't see the physical world, but you are still you, world is still it. The biology of physical body is the vehicle through which the soul engages with the material world. You knock it out, soul is fine, life force is fine, mind is fine. But through the life force vehicle, we engage with the life force world. Through the mind, we engage with the mind world. Knock out those two, soul is still there, universe is still what it is, but it cannot act anymore in those domains. In order to act in those domains, and especially in the material world, you need these vehicles to be able to act there. Now, you could simply say, as is the objective in many religions and many spiritual traditions, I want to get free of all this mess. I just want to withdraw into the beyond and live in that perfect beauty and joy of the harmony of the divine consciousness. Get rid of it. And it's a valid path if one so chooses. But would it serve the objective of why the universe was manifested? The whole objective for which evolution has been struggling. And this is the point Sri Aurobindo makes. We came upon earth not to abandon and go back. We came upon earth to bring that truth here and manifest it. And what we have done, in dead matter, we brought life force, we awakened mind, and our current human formulation is the highest that we've been able to do so far. And the next step is what we are now preparing to express. And all the human tendencies today are pointing towards realizing these higher possibilities and expressing them. But left to our own personal effort and to the mind's effort, one can go so far. One has at some point to shift the level of consciousness in which we live, from which the effort itself is made. And as we rise into an intuitive consciousness, our whole capacity to deal with ourselves and our circumstances will change. All true creativity comes from intuition. Everything else in the rational world is permutations and combinations of existing things. All true artists, true musicians, true architects are tapping into the intuitive consciousness. Now, when you begin to live in the intuitive consciousness, you can effortlessly know and express whatever you need. Imagine a scientist living in intuitive consciousness. Okay, we need to create a new substance, a metamaterial with these properties. And the intuitive scientist says, okay, here I know. Get this, get that, arrange it in this way, and I've got it. Yes. And you see how it would change completely the whole material life, human life. You can. She said that's alchemy. But a supramental consciousness, similarly, like the mother said, put a pillar there. It's obvious. You don't have to think it out. So its values would be totally different. Its primary motivations would be totally different. What would it do? Its way of experiencing the world would be totally different. When you smell the rose, if your nose was as developed as a dog's, right where you are, you could smell all these flowers and identify each flower uniquely from the other. Isn't that extraordinary? If just amplifying your senses, physical senses, can change your perspective of the world, when your consciousness changes so radically, you meet the world as an embrace of the divine. Each substance, each object you hold is experienced as a contact with substance of divinity, and the nature of the contact is Ananda. And so a supramental consciousness inhabiting a supramental body would live by completely different ways, experience the world in a completely different way. And this is the next inevitable step in evolution. Considering that it is the level of consciousness that now is what the human mind is aspiring for, and it's already there waiting and waiting to express, it's inevitable in the very nature of things. It's the operation behind the mind which makes mind possible, and so it must come forward more and more eventually. Question is whether it's in a million years, or it's in the next 1,000 years, or perhaps in our current lifetime. That depends on us, because we can consciously evolve. And this means of conscious evolution is what we call yoga. And the integral yoga, Sri Aurobindo particularly formulates it for this objective, for a complete taking up of the whole of our being, all the levels of our consciousness, raising them, putting them in relation to the divine consciousness, and establishing the supramental consciousness in all of them. And that would lead to, even we would use the vocabulary of a new species of humanity. Because this consciousness and its vehicle of expression would be so radically different. You could not call it a normal, rational human being anymore. It would be as distinct from a human as the human is from the ape. Although the biological basis is common with the ape, we're so different, we call ourselves a different species. And the same would happen in this transition, but it would be a physical substance, a physical body, but the substance of the body itself would be capable of expressing a supramental consciousness experience. So it is in this direction that Sri Aurobindo points, and it is this which is the new consciousness, and based on it, the new world that we're speaking of. So this is the big picture which should set the context for our understanding of this whole thing. So you can see how the rational mind can understand supermind. The intuitive parts in us can resonate with its truths. Therefore, we are destined to realize it. Okay.
How much of my conscience and feeling and harmony am I using when I text all day, when I order online, instead of going to a flower shop and I see the flowers, they talk to me, I smell them, I can touch them. I need a book to read, I don't need a Kindle because I may want to keep it. Where are we going?
So, as things are, each time you are doing something simple, lift a glass to pour water, your mind is involved, even if you are not conscious of it, right? In the same way, each time you think out something rationally, your intuitive consciousness is involved, even though you are not conscious of it. And each time the intuitive consciousness acts, the supermind behind is the true cause of things, even though you are not conscious of it. The difference is, as you evolve, you will become conscious of these layers and you will live in those layers rather than in your more superficial parts.
I guess I'm getting old.
Thanks, miss.
In your example of the body, for example, what you gave, get blasted in the bomb, and you still have the soul, but you also mentioned you have consciousness and or mind. Now, I thought the mind was a function of the body, not the soul. So how do you relate to that?
Okay. So in the yogic tradition, we do not see mind as a product of the body. That's the current medical assumption. It's not even evidence. It is assumed that mind is a product of the brain process. But it is possible to demonstrate medically also that mind survives the body, can disengage, experience things, and come back with full memory, which happens in certain out-of-body experiences, for example.
You travel with the soul.
Yes. So the mind has a separate body made of mental substance, as has life energy, a separate body made of life energy substance, as is physical body made of physical substance. And in us, currently, all three are fused into each other. During sleep state, some part of the mind vital disengages from the physical and can wander off, experience things, and then come back. And that's why we have the sleep paralysis experience where you wake up, but you're not able to move because the subtle body is separated from the physical still. And often the shock of return is felt as a falling experience and a jerk, which makes your body move. Now, all of this can be validated by subjective experience, but also by objective measures.
One more question. In your example of supermind, superconsciousness, also is known as Keval Gyan, which means the total knowledge. Did Sri Aurobindo describe any stages? Now you gave examples, but how many stages where you can identify where your mind is or where your consciousness is?
Yes. So one can identify by the way the mind works of where it is currently in its overall evolution, by the way the consciousness operates. So there are experiences we all have, of glimpses of intuitive insights, for example. But a state can be developed where the overall rational functioning of the mind is intuitivized. So it is still thinking rationally, but as it turns to think, poof, you have an intuition. As it turns to think, poof, you have an intuition. There's a mix of the thinking process and the intuitive consciousness merging. So what I've described as distinct stages, in fact, they tend to merge into each other. They tend to influence into each other as we begin the journey of awakening. And so there are two movements. There's one consciousness rising up into a higher vision, and then there's this higher working, descending and settling in the lower substance, clarifying, amplifying its possibilities. Genius is nothing but intuitive possibilities of consciousness now reflecting and operating in the lower mental substance. All of us potentially can awaken genius because it's accessible, it's there already. Yes.
So far, the evolution has been unconscious or subconscious, and one of the principal thing is that not we collaborate consciously, the evolution can be accelerated. What is the proof of that statement? What do we know that it can be accelerated? Or it is just an assumption?
No, there are two things. First is the logic of it. What is evolution finally? The possibilities of the consciousness currently held in the subliminal grades now emerging into the liminal and surface operations. That's all that evolution is. So all the potential of our mind, individual embodied mind, is held in the free mental consciousness of the mental world. When those possibilities get more and more directly organized in our embodied mental consciousness, we say we've evolved. But the things which come in evolution are already present in those grades of consciousness. That's the promise that you're able to evolve. The second thing is the evidence. There are people who've done it. Sri Aurobindo gives very good examples in the ashram. People who came with no intellectual training or capacity, who were duffers by any reference. They come and within a year, suddenly they're spouting genius in art, music, poetry. And he says nothing can explain that except the action of the yoga force. And this is true. So before we close, I'll end with one very important idea. All these levels of consciousness, where are they? They're not up there 6 feet above or 6 miles above. They're right here, everywhere. The physical world, the vital world, and life energy is all here. It's an ocean of life energy in which the physical world floats, which is held in an ocean of mind substance, which is held in a higher mind substance, which is held in the illumined consciousness, in the intuitive consciousness, in the overmental, in the supramental. All is an expression of supermind. Therefore, all is formed of supermind essentially. Where is supermind? Here. It's on a grade of vibration which is so different we're not able to feel, see it. But when parts within us begin to awaken to it, those parts resonate with it and we see and feel it directly. Where is supermind? Right here, within us. What allows us to function rationally? Supermind working behind several veils. If it was not there, there would be no order to thought, to manifestation. It is cosmos because of supermind holding it in order. Our thoughts have logic because it is supermind, which is the reference, which creates the sense of obviousness of logic. And therefore, all the faculties of the mind are supported by supermind secretly behind. This will be the theme of our discussion in the afternoon. So where is supermind? Right now, within you, around you, everywhere. The difference is only of its emergence overtly, rather than its secret support and action behind the veils. So do not think of it as something far away. Do not think of it as something inaccessible. Think of it as the most intimate truth of your being, of your existence, of your life. And it is the Divine Mother herself as the Shakti of Supermind who leads us in the yoga and who transforms our consciousness.
So basically it would be to connect with your life force, because life is all around you, life force.
Yeah. So at each of these levels, you can experience universality. At the physical level, at the level of life energy, at the level of mind, you can experience universality. But none of them will liberate you from your current limitations. So to accept it as life force is useful. It will give you great powers, amplify your life energies, but it will not liberate you from your current limitations. It will not free you from the limitation of ignorance of consciousness. You need to reach all the way to the supramental consciousness, which will know mind, life, and body as its facets and bring them into harmony. Otherwise, just life force can create disharmony with the body or the mind.
What I understood earlier is that life force is all around us.
Yes.
So when we connect with the life force,
Yes.
and from there we evolve.
So not only life force, in all the parts of our being, we should open to the higher ranges of consciousness, from the body, from the life force, and from the mind. On all levels, we should open to the higher. Completely, all of you, the person, and all the layers and parts should open to the Divine Shakti.
What does it take to reach there?
In one
What does it take to reach there? In the way Sri Aurobindo formulates it, in the most essential, three things are needed, he says: aspiration, rejection, surrender. Aspiration is the turning of the consciousness towards that which you seek, which you wish to know, which you wish to become. And that is first. Without aspiration, rejection, and surrender will be ineffective. So this is the first, the turning in your mind, in your heart, eventually in your body. But you start with whatever part within you aspires. Eventually, it should include everything. Even the body tissue should feel the aspiration, eventually. Second, rejection. Rejection of all movements and tendencies which are contrary to your aspiration. And they are part of the old world, part of the animal inheritance. Instincts, biologically programmed, you can't help it. You get upset when somebody criticizes you. Duh. Why do you get upset? In a consciousness which sees oneness, you would never bother with it. But it's a reaction from past programming. So I refuse that. I refuse to get upset. Okay, so second is rejection. And the third, surrender, which is this part aspiring, gives itself to that towards which it aspires, to the divine. By giving itself, it opens the way for that to descend and act in you directly to change you. You cannot think yourself into supermanhood, just as a monkey cannot think itself into rationality. But you can open yourself as a vessel, and the supramental consciousness can pour into you and awaken and organize in all its possibilities. And that comes only when you give yourself to it fully, willingly, without resistance, allowing her to mold you. That's why the surrender. So three things are needed: aspiration, rejection, surrender. But he puts it in at such an essential level that from this you could develop a whole system of practice and a philosophy. It's all held in these three words.
So when we
You,
talk
you
about,
make it look so easier.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
it took Buddha and Mahavira 14 years, 12 to 14 years going in the jungles to achieve what he saw.
Very important question.
but when we talk about rejection, basically it says whatever is arising from all our five senses is the worldly passions and anger and all that stuff, right?
So we reject the distorted expressions, not the part itself. The part which is angry is not rejected. It is its tendency to get angry which we reject, because that's incompatible with the higher
So
consciousness.
basically what we have in Hinduism, Jainism, all that, Maya, Krodh, Lobh, Maya, that is the rejection.
That's part of that, part of it, yes. But the question, it sounds so easy, and yet the Buddha took such a long time, etc. Wait, the Buddha attempted something different. He was not seeking for supramental realization. His goal was to find the shortest means to get free of suffering. And that he found the shortest means to get free of suffering by merging into the transcendent, into the absolute. As long as you're in the relatives, he found you could not get free from ignorance. But this is one solution. There is a not as short method, which is perhaps more complete, which is to transform this ignorance, free from it by an action of a higher consciousness descending. It takes longer. But Buddha's objective was the shortest means. So we have to put that in context. What Sri Aurobindo is speaking of is a transformation of life which would necessarily free you from ignorance and therefore from suffering, and manifest a divinity, a divine possibility. But it is a longer process, more inclusive of all the parts of our being. Nothing is left out. And the question now comes of easy or difficult. One letter from Sri Aurobindo. A disciple writes to Sri Aurobindo and says, so and so told me that if I surrender myself entirely to the mother, then she can transform me in a moment. Is it true? It sounds ridiculous, right? But Sri Aurobindo's reply, yes, it is true. If you could surrender yourself entirely. The problem is we can't. We start with a part where we are conscious and begin, even that sometimes goes through some resistance to opening and offering itself and surrendering. So the process itself takes long because of the habit of the past. It is not difficult. It is complex. It is difficult to the extent that we are not conscious and we have to become conscious. But the moment we become conscious and we disengage from the past tendencies, the transmutation itself is done by the divine consciousness easily. So our collaboration is what changes the whole thing For the divine, it is instantaneously possible. For us, it is a question of how long it takes us to open and so on.
That's very
So the question we should not worry about, is it difficult or easy? The way I formulate it deliberately to show you, it is in fact the most inevitable and the most easy thing to do, because it is in the very nature of things, the deepest truth of things. It is the easiest, Sri Aurobindo says, considering what the effort leads us to. It is the most difficult because it involves an effort which is not natural for us. It is an all-inclusive effort. So the effort is the most difficult from the scope, the most easy with the result that the effort gives us. So not to worry about easy. The point is, at each step as you grow, it is a joyous awakening to your own highest potential, to the divine possibilities, and our highest ideals, remember, are being fulfilled as we grow. So focus rather on the way and the joy of the awakening. And an easy, difficult will not matter. You may even choose to go slow because it's enjoyable to experience all the finer gradations. And some others may choose to go rapidly, skipping finer gradations because that's their need. And it depends on your soul's aspiration. So we'll hold all this together in our consciousness briefly as we concentrate and assimilate. And offer ourselves in joy and in love to the Divine Mother and to Sri Aurobindo.
The cars outside for you to take to the cafeteria. Make sure you have the card to show and swipe at the cafeteria. We will regroup here at 2:30. Be on time. Thank
I
you.
watched you on YouTube.
Oh, good. It worked?
Yeah.
How is the audio? Can you check the audio quality?
I don't know.
I'm not sure. Because picking up from the local mic.